Good morning, and thank you for joining INSA's Coffee and Conversation featuring Neal Ziring. Before we begin, we'd like to share a video from today's sponsor, Mantec.
Massive cyber attack on the nation's financial institutions.
Now, please welcome INSA's Vice President for Policy, Larry Hanauer.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for INSA's Coffee and Conversation. This morning, we're pleased to welcome one of the intelligence community's top leaders to our program. But before we begin, let me make a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Also, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call today. So this is a reminder that this program is on the record. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Adam Rudow, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Intelligence Sector at Mantec, who will introduce our speaker. Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Larry. On behalf of Mantec, I'd like to thank INSA for hosting this morning's conversation, which is so relevant to all of us. Today's topics include the detection, prevention, and response to cyber attacks, including the adoption of cyber best practices such as zero trust. NSA has been instrumental in helping to protect networks across the government and industry. This is a major focus of the agency and one that our speaker and his directorate are key in implementing. Obviously, the government networks are targets of our adversaries, and protection of these networks are critical to our national security. But industry's well-known close partnership with government makes our contractor networks just as much of a target. Our speaker today has been instrumental in outreach and partnership with the defense industrial base to ensure we understand and can protect ourselves from these threats. Mantec has been collaborating with the Cybersecurity Directorate, and as are a number of other companies represented here in this session. And I know we look forward to continuing to collaborate to better protect our equities from our adversaries. It is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Neal Ziring. Many of you know Neal as the Technical Director of the Cybersecurity Directorate. In this capacity, he is responsible for technical assessments, external engagements, workforce development, and strategic direction for NSA's cybersecurity mission. Some may know him from his previous role as the Technical Director of NSA's Capabilities Directorate. And before he transitioned to that role, he was Technical Director for the Information Assurance Directorate, all three roles complex and critical roles within the agency. You may not know that Neal has been at NSA for over 30 years, before which he worked at Bell Labs. I can't think of a more appropriate expert to lead this discussion. So without further delay, welcome, Neal.
Great. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Neal, for joining us this morning. To that illustrious resume, you can now add participation in INSA's Coffee and Conversation. Excellent. So let me start this morning with a broad question about your top issues. As the Technical Director for NSA's Cybersecurity Directorate, you're responsible for some of NSA's most important missions. So what are the main challenges that you face and the priorities that you have for 2022?
That's a great question, and probably could take up the whole hour just talking about that. But I'll just list a few of them to start with. I think the main challenge we have right now is scaling up. Right, since we established the Cybersecurity Directorate a little over 2 years ago, we've been doing great things, right? We've been using intelligence and letting it drive risk mitigations and building up partnerships. But how do we do that at greater scale? How do we expand what we've been able to do with the defense industrial base, for example, from 100 companies to 1,000 or even 10,000? How do we start getting cyber threat information out to lots and lots of partners and doing it at relevant speed? So that's the big one. Another one is there's the continued challenge of how best to use our unique intelligence insights and combine them with the unique insights of our government industry partners to really create effective risk mitigations and to defeat adversary activities. And then finally, a big challenge for us, and one that is really an expectation of all of our stakeholders downtown and in the DoD, is next-gen encryption.
Yeah.
Rolling out modern encryption devices and the associated infrastructure to really modernize, bring into the 21st century that last line of defense, good encryption.
Right. Great. Well, those are clear priorities. I want to get to each of those actually during the course of our conversation, so we'll have plenty of time to explore them. Let me start though with another scene setting kind of question to set the stage for some of those issues, and just ask a broad question about cyber threats. We're all aware generally of the threats posed by malware, data theft, denial of service attacks, and the like. But what are the principal threats that NSA addresses, and how, if at all, are the risks elevated right now because of tensions with Russia over Ukraine?
Okay, so we have to look at a broad spectrum of threats, of course. There's always the sort of ongoing threat of nation state rivals. We're in an era of great power competition, and how are those other nations trying to understand our activities and the capabilities of our military forces and our intelligence community, our defense industrial base, right? They're always seeking insight on those things, and we want to defeat that and eradicate those threats. Also, especially for the DoD and the defense industrial base, there's a constant threat of theft of that intellectual property, and that's broader than defense and DIB, of course, but those are the areas where our authorities see us focusing the most. Understanding which technologies or systems those adversaries are targeting, and how we can work with those companies, those system owners, to improve their posture so that these adversaries will be unsuccessful. And similarly, sort of threats against currently deployed and operational weapons systems that we may need in a crisis or conflict, right? We have to understand their vulnerability and how those vulnerabilities or exposures can be mitigated. I think that's enough for now.
Okay.
We can, of course, talk more about threat. Oh, you talked about heightened threat, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so whenever there's international tensions like now, you're gonna see heightened threat. And you've even seen some of this in open press reporting about Russian-backed groups sort of escalating their activities both in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Right.
So we have to be particularly mindful of that, use the intelligence insights that we have, and work with our private industry partners and government partners, like CISA and the FBI, to try to put together sort of a full picture of what these malicious actors are doing, and then work to defeat them, right? And one of the things we've done in that regard, directly as a result of these heightened tensions, is issuing additional guidance published on NSA.gov or published jointly with CISA, FBI, and others about specific threats in tradecraft of Russian actors and how to secure some of the systems that they tend to go after.
Right. And in fact, I know NSA, CISA, and the Justice Department just last month issued a joint cybersecurity advisory about Russian state-sponsored cyber threats to critical infrastructure. So do you have concerns about the resilience of U.S. critical infrastructure given what's going on in the world? And if so, to some degree, how is NSA working to help private infrastructure operators secure their networks?
Yes, well, so we've always had concerns about that, the cyber resilience of critical infrastructure. We've been working with partners in that area, I don't know, at least 15 years, probably longer. We don't have, of course, direct authority for any of the critical infrastructure sectors. We do have some delegated responsibility for defense industrial base nowadays.
Right.
But we've acted as a understanding of threat and an understanding of vulnerability to assist those who do have the direct responsibility, such as CISA and the various sector-specific agencies. So yeah, we're working with them. They share what they know and what they've learned with us, and then we attempt to provide mitigations. We've published a number of things about, for example, control systems, vulnerabilities, and mitigations, since industrial control systems are so prevalent in most critical infrastructures, right? You got to secure those.
Right. Now, one of NSA's critical missions is protecting U.S. government infrastructure. And of course, President Biden just issued a national security memorandum to improve the cybersecurity of national security, Department of Defense, and intelligence community networks. So how will this NSM change the way the federal government protects classified government networks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And of course, the national security memorandum you mentioned is very much on our minds around here. So the main thing that the memo does, and I invite all the folks on the call today to read it, it's actually a really good read, is give us two things. One, it will give us improved visibility, right? The memo requires reporting certain types of incidents and sharing cybersecurity posture information with the National Manager for National Security Systems, right? That's, of course, General Knox Stoney. And then his deputy national manager is my boss, the Cybersecurity Director, Rob Joyce. So that's number one. It'll give us improved visibility into what national security systems, defense, intelligence, et cetera, are out there. And then second, it will give us greater ability to direct change or mitigation for those systems, right? So we get the visibility, we know better what is exposed or what is at risk. And then the memo gives us improved ability to try to fix those things.
Right.
One, through emergency orders, right? In particularly dire circumstances, we can issue an emergency order to, for example, fix something or patch something. Binding operational directives, those have to be coordinated, but once the coordination happens, they go out. People have to do what they direct. And also it gives us some special ability to direct within the areas of cryptography and cross-domain solutions.
Right. So basically the NSN mandates additional information sharing within the interagency, within the national security community, and then gives NSA additional authorities to fix any vulnerabilities that you identify.
That's right.
Great. So as you mentioned, one of the key issues in the NSM is encryption. So I'd like to delve into that a little bit. The National Security Memorandum requires all agencies to use NSA's encryption standards to encrypt classified data at rest and to implement quantum-resistant protocols. So there's a lot there, but how is NSA working to ensure that US encryption outpaces our adversaries' quantum capabilities? And how confident are you that US communications and data, especially classified data, will remain secure?
Yeah, that is certainly a key question that we think about here every day. So the first part of NSM says to protect classified information, you have to use NSA-approved algorithms at rest and for data in transit, right? That's something the NSA has been doing since the 50s, and our predecessors even before that, specifying this encryption is effective, it's strong, you should use it, and you should use it in these circumstances. So we're going to continue to do that. And we've been working closely with other parts of the Department of Defense and other parts of the national security community, to get that message out, right? And I mentioned earlier the huge effort we have towards next-gen encryption. And then associated with that, you have to have, effective key management and all that other infrastructure that I could go into if we have time. On the quantum-resistant crypto in particular, right? This is a very long-term issue, right? Nobody is going to build a cryptographically relevant quantum computer anytime soon.
Right.
But we have to think well in advance, and that's particularly important to the intelligence community because a lot of the data that we have has to be protected for a long time. It has an intelligence lifetime of 20, 30, 50 sometimes years. So we NSA have to think about this problem way in advance. And we are doing that. We have been working on it for several years, both for classified within NSA and then for the broader government and private sector. We are working closely with NIST, who has the lead for quantum resistant crypto. And they've been doing great stuff. They have their competition that's going really well. So within the national security community, right, we are defining these algorithms, and then we're working with our vendor base to get them implemented in all manner of devices. And we have a whole prioritized roadmap of getting that stuff implemented and rolled out and deployed, so that even with the long lead times of getting stuff deployed into the DoD or the IC, we will have it all thoroughly deployed and up and running well before that type of quantum computer could be built.
And given, I'm curious what you think the lead time is. I mean, it's not anytime soon, but is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What roughly speaking are we talking about here before those kinds of technologies can be deployed effectively?
Yeah, so I can't go into detail on that, but people should be thinking a decade or two.
Okay, that's a good sense of scale. One thing you mentioned was that the data, though, has a very long lifespan, right? It could be valuable for a long period of time. And a recent study by an INSA member firm asserted that China has been collecting encrypted information for a long time in the hopes of eventually decrypting it with new quantum capabilities. So can we assume that China will eventually be able to exploit whatever data it's already gathered and that hasn't been encrypted according to the quantum standards that we hope to develop in the future?
Yeah, so we always have to assume that, right? That's part of our general framework for thinking about how we protect highly classified information, is that the adversary is always, hoovering up the ciphertext and keeping it against the day that they might be able to encrypt it. And so we have been working to mitigate those threats to the extent we could, like I said, for several years now, focusing on the highest priority areas, and then rolling things out as we get more of the devices able to operate with these algorithms. And then similarly, private sector, once NIST has their algorithms defined and the various standards organizations like IETF and IEEE and so forth define the protocol standards based on the algorithms, folks should be thinking about this and how are they going to manage a measured, controlled, step-by-step rollout of quantum-resistant cryptography in their own enterprise.
Right, but just looking backwards, can we assume that whatever our adversaries have hoovered up is vulnerable to decryption according to the, let's say, 2022 standards if something was being hoovered up today, and that so in a decade when we have good quantum technologies, it's probably likely that whatever's sitting in a foreign network somewhere is probably vulnerable to decryption.
Some of it will be, yeah. It'll depend on what cryptography was used at the time. If you're using purely secret key crypto as opposed to public key, which, for example, many tactical systems use purely secret key.
Sure.
It's a little bit different story when it comes to quantum. You don't get the exponential speed up that a sufficiently large quantum computer could give you against certain public key algorithms. But yeah, that's definitely a concern that we have to keep tracking.
Yeah, well, let's keep looking forward then. One key element, though, that you mentioned is working with the private sector. So what is NSA doing to help transition industry to using quantum-resistant algorithms over this period of time? And how are you working with them already to help them develop capabilities that can be used to build those future quantum capabilities?
So that is a really good question. Keep in mind, of course, that NIST has the lead for this. We're supporting NIST, and we meet with them regularly, work with them, go to the standards meetings, all that stuff. We are also focusing our efforts through the standards community. So you think about NIST is going to select quantum resistant algorithms, but then those algorithms have to be built into protocols.
Right.
And things like IPsec and TLS, right? They'll have to be, and certificate standards. So we are working with the standards bodies and attending those meetings and trying to put our experience in working with these technologies into those processes, so that once the algorithm selections are made, the standards community can move fairly quickly to define the effective standards, and then the companies that manufacture gear and that make software and that provide cloud services right, are all watching that too, and we're talking to them, and NIST is talking to them and saying, hey, you got to prepare. We know this is coming. Think about the architectures of your products and how you will integrate, for example, a quantum resistant key exchange into your product or service going forward. And I think generally that's going pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, standards bodies are always contentious. There is differences of opinion, and our experts join right into those discussions. But I'm pretty confident the way the standards community and NIST have sort of spun up on all this, that we're going to have good solid standards in a few years that all of the manufacturers, software makers, service providers will be able to adopt.
Great. And it's clearly an iterative process. So there's a lot of
It's going
consultation,
to take time.
which is great. Leads to much better results. Let me turn to some other technologies that I know are of great interest, particularly artificial intelligence. So can you describe how NSA's implemented AI and machine learning tools in critical mission areas? Particularly, what challenges remain and what capabilities do you still need to acquire or to enhance?
Unfortunately, I can't on this venue go into sort of the specific mission systems where we've implemented this. It's been spoken about before that one of the areas we invested heavily and effectively for machine learning has been in processing of human language, processing of speech and text, and obviously a SIGINT agency needs to be able to do those things. We're now looking at additional areas, particularly, I've been watching the areas that involve cybersecurity, using or looking at how we can best use machine learning and AI type systems for behavioral analysis, for assessment of malware, for sort of looking at our own systems to look for anomalies or attempted attacks. And we think there's really great potential for that. And so we're investing in it, and we're working with other areas such as national labs on advancing that technology. But the other piece of that, or the flip side of that we're only starting to work on, and we're very early days on this, is understanding the security needs of AI or ML-based systems themselves. So if a DoD element implements a machine learning system, for example, to drive a vehicle, then what are the vulnerabilities of that and across its entire life cycle?
Right.
And how should we be securing them? Because it's not clear that the security we might think of applying for a normal software system, if that's enough, if that has all the right pieces for protecting an AI system.
Right.
So that will be a focus for us in the next few years, is think about how we can do that, and do it better, and then advise our customers as they adopt that technology how to do it securely.
So when you talk about the security of AI systems, it sounds like that's everything from the reliability of the data that's used to develop the system and train the models, to the security of the system so that it doesn't get sort of reprogrammed or hijacked, so that it's a autonomous driving capability for a tactical vehicle isn't trained to drive into the cliff rather than around it, or right? All those things are potential vulnerabilities.
Yes, and I think that, and there may be some that we haven't even thought of yet.
Sure.
But that's why I emphasize the life cycle. An AI or ML system can be so dependent on the things you do early in the life cycle, like gathering training data and training initial models. We have to extend our security thinking back into those stages.
Right.
And I think there are plenty of folks in industry who are also thinking about this in various sectors, including financial sectors. So we will have to tap into their knowledge and experience as well.
And do you see the applications for AI and ML principally in the agency's traditional SIGINT missions, in its cybersecurity missions, in its missions to protect government networks, or is it all of the above?
Oh, it's really all of them. Any place that you want to more fully understand or gather insights that data can give you, AI and ML have a potential to help you, right? And also anywhere that you may want to scale up an operation that you previously did manually, you can start looking at human machine teaming,
right,
to kind of empower or expand what the humans are able to do. So for sure, we're looking at it for cyber operations, for analytics, for sort of conventional intelligence, as well as intelligence that support to cyber.
Yeah.
All of those things are areas that we think have high potential.
Great. Let me address another technology area, and that's cloud computing, which is obviously a big area for government and for industry. The president's May executive order called for improvements to federal cloud security, and NSA and CISA have jointly released a number of guidance documents on how private companies can secure their own cloud infrastructure. So what are the top cloud vulnerabilities that government and industry need to mitigate, and how should they proceed?
Okay, so at least in my perception, and unfortunately I don't have like one of our deep cloud SMEs here in the room with me, the main one right now often is misconfiguration. Modern cloud systems are fairly complex. I'll give the cloud providers credit for trying to make it simple, but it's still inherently complex. And configuring those things properly, and if you have a large cloud presence, make sure you got all of it, is still difficult.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the number one challenge. The next challenge, in my view, at the moment, and I've talked about this publicly before, is the challenges that come from hybrid architectures. Very few parts of government are going to go all in on cloud and completely give up all their on-premise IT.
Yeah.
And so you're always going to have these boundaries or these interfaces between the parts of your IT that are still in your enterprise or in your building and the parts that are out in the cloud or parts that are in several clouds. So those interface points are really a key area of exposure. And we've even seen malicious actors already taking advantage of that. After some of the SolarWinds stuff, that was one of the exploitation avenues that actors used. And we've seen in other cases too. So those are the two main ones that I think about at this time.
Okay, and I mean, as you noted, companies and organizations are reluctant to put all of their data in the cloud, but that opens up vulnerabilities at those interface points. Should companies just go all in to a cloud infrastructure to minimize those interfaces, or is it better to sort of put your eggs in multiple baskets, as it were?
Wow, that's a deep question. I don't think there is one answer.
Okay.
It's going to depend on the type of enterprise, its size, the depth of sort of their in-house IT, and also, of course, a policy or regulatory regimes that they're subject to.
Right.
The thing that I would urge organizations to think about is look at both your on-premise and your cloud presence and perhaps different cloud providers that you have access to, and make a choice based on the security needs of that system or capability and the security features that are offered in that environment. Don't just assume one is always better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
Make an informed choice after looking at what's available.
Right. Makes sense. So a personal choice for an organization based on a lot of different factors. Yeah. Let me jump into another topic that I know is of interest to the agency, zero trust. Right. That is an approach that a lot of organizations are taking. And we have questions about zero trust from, I'll start going to some of the audience questions, from Jared Gazarek of HashiCorp and Courtney Colano of Colano and Associates. And their questions are that NSA's emphasized the importance of embracing a zero trust security model. So what is the agency's approach to adopting zero trust architecture, and how has zero trust affected your enterprise?
Okay. So we certainly are advocating for it. I mean, zero trust is an architectural approach that might be better characterized as zero implicit trust. Okay, so in a zero trust architecture, you're granting trust to an entity or a system or a person because they've earned it through authentication standards and authorization and permissions that are granted and so forth. And how you architect an enterprise around that is really what we're trying to help people to do effectively. And NSA has been implementing elements of what we now call zero trust since at least 2006 and possibly earlier. And I was involved in some aspects of that myself in the 2008 through 2011 timeframe. But now we have brought it together into a sort of a unifying architectural concept that we think is very effective at guiding an enterprise's investment. Okay, what am I going to do next? Okay, I have to have strong authentication in order to power control of rights. So I'm going to invest in strong authentication and ICAM.
Okay.
And then next, okay, if I want to control access to my data, I have to have the data tagged or marked in such a way that I know what policies apply to it. So I'm going to go do that part. And it's always going to be stepwise, right? You can't do a sudden, okay, flag day, we're on zero trust. That can't happen.
Right.
So we're working with partners such as the DoD CIO to understand how this can be done most effectively in DoD, and then give folks advice, and then extend that to more of national security systems through Committee on National Security Systems policies.
Right, makes sense. Let me talk about some of the other cybersecurity missions you're engaged in. Software supply chain, of course, is a big challenge and something that takes up a lot of the agency's time. So Executive Order 14028, which the President issued in May, calls for improvements to the software supply chain. What steps has NSA taken to ensure the security of the software that the agency employs, and how can companies secure their software from constantly evolving future risks, given that risk management efforts really focus on what we know today about present day threats, and it's hard to look forward. So what is the agency doing, and how can companies secure their software supply chains?
So I was much more familiar with what the agency was doing when I was in the Capabilities Directorate, so my knowledge might be a little out of date. We do, of course, try to be very careful with what software we employ and what packages we import from commercial or open source repositories in order to incorporate into the mission software that we build. Right. And we track that very carefully, and we have a whole process for controlling that. And that is a critical element that all enterprises should think about, right? You should know what is in your software, and you should make a conscious choice. I'm going to accept the risk of using this package, or I'm not going to accept the risk using that package.
Right.
Technologies and standards are evolving that help with that. Particularly software bill of materials is one big one, but there are others. And we're big fans of software bill of materials, so-called SBOMs. And we've been working with National Telecommunications Industry Administration, NTIA, and other government stakeholders on that. It's also important to look at other elements of software assurance, and we have a whole group within NSA called the Center for Assured Software that looks at those things. And we've collaborated with industry partners to pull together best practices for the original authors of software and those who assemble it into finished products and those who accept those products and employ them in their enterprises. We had big activity that collected all of that. We gave all that to NIST as input to their process under the executive order, and now we're engaged in trying to prepare some of that for broader publication. And a lot of it really comes down to having visibility into the software elements on which you're relying on.
Yeah.
And the more you can do that with tools like SBOM and good build processes and so forth, the more you'll be prepared when some new vulnerability is announced, and you have to then take some kind of mitigating action.
Yeah. So the key then to securing the software supply chain seems very similar to the key to securing the supply chain for a widget you might build. You need to have visibility into your suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers down the chain, so you know what's going into your product.
Yeah, and software, of course, is especially complex in many respects. So this is not just something that any one entity, like the end consumer of a piece of software, can do by themselves.
Right.
Sort of every member of the ecosystem has to participate. And that's why we think it's very important to have best practices outlined and documented, so that each step of the chain can sort of insist on implementation of those best practices from the folks further back in the supply chain. And it's not just us, right? There are even open source organizations like the Linux Foundation are getting into this area and trying to promote best practices and technological tooling, for example, in their case, in the open source community, so that we can rely on software with sort of greater confidence.
Right. No, that makes sense. So transparency and then validation, really making sure that everyone did their part further down the chain. One of the missions, the agency missions that you alluded to in your opening remarks, was about hardening space and weapons systems. So I know that's a sensitive topic, but the government needs to ensure the cybersecurity of critical systems like space assets, weapons platforms, and others to maintain combat readiness. So what can you tell us about the threats that these systems are facing and the government's efforts to secure these assets?
Okay. So the threats they're facing are relatively straightforward, right? Our adversaries want to know what our weapons platforms and space systems can do. And they want to, if possible, be able to disrupt their operation or degrade their operation. They view cyber as a potentially asymmetric advantage, right? If you can reach out through cyberspace and, for example, degrade use of a particular space system that U.S. forces may rely upon, well, that's a good thing for them.
Right.
So we, of course, have to prevent that. And part of that is understanding the cyber exposure of our key systems. Sorry, I keep clicking this. And working with the system owners and in most cases, the companies that produce components and integrate the final system.
Right.
To understand what those exposures are and then fix them, and then monitor to make sure they stay fixed. Okay? And we have an important program here within NSA that we're working with other parts of the Pentagon on, so-called Strategic Cybersecurity Program, which is looking at key systems. And it's been great working with the different military services. And I think we're really reaching our stride on that program in getting in, understanding the risks on these systems, documenting them, and then seeing that they're fixed. So very important. And there are other programs across the DoD to look at assurance for components in these systems, hardware and software components, and how you can kind of understand the risk over the program lifecycle and work to mitigate those risks. Right. And we're involved in a bunch of those.
So your explanation highlights the importance of public-private collaboration, not just, in weapons security, but also we've talked about a whole range of other issues. So let me ask a little bit about the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, the CCC, which NSA has used to expand its outreach into the private sector by issuing joint cybersecurity alerts and otherwise engaging industry. So can you give us just sort of a high-level overview of the Cyber Collaboration Center, its objectives, its focus areas, and how it works with the private sector?
Sure. It's on the fourth floor of a building over there, and I love going over to the Collaboration Center. I work with them all the time, and it exists because we know that national security systems, military systems are all targets, as is the Defense Industrial Base. And the Collaboration Center provides us a venue where we can work more effectively with those different groups at whatever classification level we need to work with them at. And that's often at unclassified, right? Which is a bit of a culture shock for us, but we're having to do it.
Right.
And I remember when we were planning the Cybersecurity Directorate, that was a huge emphasis. Like, hey, we need an org and a place where this kind of collaboration can occur. And we have certain unique insights that from our expertise and signals intelligence and so forth, but our industry partners also have unique insights through the aperture that they possess and the expertise they possess. So by bringing all those groups together, service providers, defense industrial base companies, cybersecurity companies, government agencies, sort of into this environment, we can do better discovery of threats, better understanding of those. We can innovate. We can try to come up with new tradecraft, new ways of doing analysis, and then we can mitigate. We can come up with new approaches to fixing things, get those fixes out fast to whatever level of the ecosystem works best. And we've had some really good successes where we were able to discover, we were able to innovate and collaborate, and then work with partners to push out a mitigation that disrupted or denied adversary access. And we're still growing that. We're expanding our collaboration across defense industrial base and cybersecurity companies and service providers. We're working closely with other government agencies like CISA. CISA has their new, what's it called? Joint Defense Cybersecurity Collaborative. I'm probably mangling the name, I apologize. JCDC.
Okay.
So we are working with them. That's also a collaborative environment with some of the same folks. So we think that form of collaboration and being able to do the merging of all our different visibility and access and ability to influence has tremendous potential for the defense industrial base and government, and for sort of public and private sector writ large.
Yeah, that's great. Let me get to a couple of audience questions in the time we have left. I want to ask a question from Bill Gertz of the Washington Times. He asks, FBI Director Chris Wray said last night that China's engaged in a massive, sophisticated hacking program larger than any other government. He also notes that China agreed in a 2015 agreement to curb cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property. So how do you view the Chinese hacking threat as a strategic challenge?
Chinese threats in cyberspace are huge. The Chinese government has a large number of folks that are dedicated to doing this, spread across multiple sort of elements of their government, and they are very aggressive at what they do. So clearly they are a target for intelligence, right? The intelligence community is looking at them. They know that.
Yep.
The private sector is watching them too. You know, almost every day I can read reports from private sector security entities, companies, who have said, well, we analyzed this threat group and we believe it's linked to China, and they did the following activities and attacked the following targets. So yeah, they're very active, and we have to understand their tradecraft and their intentions so that we can work effectively to block them. You can't simply block them by saying, oh, I'm going to throw some more people at it, because they have more people to throw at it. You have to do it through being smart, and like I said earlier, scaling up, taking the insights that we do have and then scaling up our ability to turn insight into action. So that's part of what we try to do through the Collaboration Center.
Right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how well would you say we understand China's goals and intentions and capabilities?
I'm not sure I can give it a number. We have some good insight, but we'd always like to have more.
Right. We have a related question from a reporter from Voice of America asking how you assess North Korea's current cyber hacking capability. So would the answer be more or less the same, or is there a nuance there?
Oh, there's definitely nuance. Every major cyber actor sort of has their own motivations, their own approaches. You know, in North Korea's case, as has been widely discussed, right, they're heavily into various forms of cyber crime as a means of generating revenue for the regime. And they're also very active in sort of certain areas, certain focused areas of information gathering. So by understanding what their sort of plans and objectives are, we can be more intelligent in how we watch them or attempt to gather intelligence about them, and then frustrate their ambitions. But you know, they are investing heavily in cyber operations, and they are quite active.
Yeah. Let me just ask one last question, if we can get a brief answer before we wrap up, because we're running out of time. This is a question from Dan Rust, and he asks, in the implementation of NSM 8, what do you see as the most difficult task that the IC will face in securing its systems, and why?
I'm not sure we're far enough along in the implementation to know yet.
Okay.
But I think a challenge, at least, that the IC will face is that the IC has been used to, at least for all the time that I've been in the IC, 30 plus years, of conducting a great deal of our business on the high side, right, on the top secret networks. And it's not clear to me that we can continue to rely so fully on that. We're going to have to be able to operate in less classified and unclassified domains and partner there and cooperate there, and that will open exposure. Gaining the practices and the habits of operating, not just like getting down there to send an email, but getting down there to actually do operations and gather, open source intelligence, all that sort of thing. Operating in that environment is going to take some new muscle memory that I think the IC will have to build up. And as we do that, there could be significant risk there that we'll have to manage.
And toward that end, is the agency going to be doing a lot more unclassified work or sort of work outside the SCIF, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, when we've all learned somehow to adapt our practices to doing more work from home?
Oh yeah, I mean, we've already done that, right? We have an unclassified work environment. I use it all the time. Hundreds, thousands of our folks do. That's happening in other parts of DoD as well. So yeah, we are already doing that. NSAs are, I mean, the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, at one point colloquially, before we gave it its real name, we called it the Unclassified Collaboration Center. Because that's such a big focus of its mission, is being able to collaborate at whatever classification level is needed, and that is often at the unclassified
level. Yeah. Great. Well, Neal, thank you very much for covering a really wide range of topics with us this morning. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could go on for a great deal longer, but we really appreciate your insights. Once again, thank you to Mantec for supporting today's program. And for all of you watching online, thank you for spending this morning with us. When the webinar ends, you'll see a short survey pop up on your screen. Please take a few moments to complete it and let us know how we did. Now, looking ahead, in recognition of Black History Month, the INSA Foundation and WCAPS, Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, are holding a virtual keynote and panel discussion on challenges and opportunities of Black women within the intelligence community. We have a terrific lineup of speakers for what should be an enlightening conversation on Wednesday, February 10th. Next up, on February 16th, we'll host the 2022 INSA Achievement Awards at the Renaissance Arlington Capitol View Hotel. DIA Director Scott Barrier will deliver the keynote remarks at this festive event, where we'll celebrate the accomplishments of 6 outstanding early and mid-career national security professionals. This year's honorees come from NRO, NGA, the Department of Energy, DHS's Homeland Security Investigations, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and Altana AI. On March 15th, we'll host NGA Director Vice Admiral Robert Sharp for a virtual leadership luncheon, where he will share his insights on the close of his tenure. And then coming up as well on Thursday, March 3rd, we've got Coffee and Conversation with Troy Menk from the Principal Deputy Director of NRO. So please join us for that. Finally, yesterday we announced that Governor Tom Ridge will receive the 37th William Oliver Baker Award at our May 14th gala at the Omni Showroom in Washington, D.C. INSA's signature event, this black tie affair attracts approximately 600 senior leaders from across our community. You can learn more about the Baker Dinner and all of these upcoming programs at insaonline.org. This concludes this morning's program. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.